Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GrowthWell Podcast. We are so glad to have you with us again. Special thanks to our sponsors at Market Scale for making this podcast happen. I've got an awesome guest for you today that I can't wait for you to meet. She started her tech career at Pardot, which you may be familiar with, eventually went on to be a part of Salesforce and their marketing arm. She went on to Terminus and helped scale that as the sales leader from $0 to $20 million. She worked at Twilio. She works at an awesome startup called Daily, but she's also a wife and she's a mom of two littles. And that brings all kinds of challenges that you know by now we're going to talk about on the GrowthWell podcast. So let's get into it. Tonni, thank you so much for being on.
Of course. Glad to be here.
We're so glad to have you and looking forward to hearing your story. I got to know you a while back when you were at Terminus. Yeah. You guys were prospecting to me as a marketing leader, and we've kind of kept in touch in the Atlanta circles and the entrepreneur and tech space. So it's fun to have you on because I don't think either of us had kids at that time, or maybe mine were just being born. And so a lot's happened since then. So why don't you catch us up a little bit on your career and your personal life a little bit?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I think you gave a good high level on resume. I guess I would add to that. I think of myself as a builder. So I have been in sales my entire career as an IC and then a leader. But since I moved into leadership with Terminus, I think of myself really as a builder. There's a lot of different types, like archetypes for sales leaders. I am not someone who thrives in an environment in a really big company where you're just rolling up a number. At every place that I've been in a role where I'm focused on diagnosing what's going well, what's not going well, usually helping to build out some form of sales process and methodology, helping to train and get a team up to speed, coach them on that to start to get to a place where we can scale a business. That's really fun for me. I am surprisingly calm in a situation where, like a lot of early stage startups, there's not a lot of data to make a decision. So you just have to try a thing and tinker with it and be really diligent about testing what's working. So that's really how I would say my career has unfolded. I'm currently at Daily. We sell video SDKs to developers to power platforms, actually much like this Market Scale. We would power an experience like this where our APIs power video.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And what about your personal life?
Well, you said it. I got two little kids now. They're 2 and 5. My husband is an entrepreneur of several bootstrap businesses. So I've stayed really plugged into the Atlanta startup ecosystem. It has grown, and it's really exciting to see how many great entrepreneurs there are here in Atlanta. And that means life is busy between his business, the work that I do, and there is a very unique trickiness about really young children. They complicate every other aspect of life.
They really do, but I know for me, I wouldn't trade it for anything, but boy, it does complicate everything. I had one of those situations just this morning when I was finally in my flow, and my wife had gone out, and my kids woke up and they needed breakfast, and that flow was busted.
Yeah.
And that happens. And so that's what this podcast a lot is all about is, how do you balance all those things? So, I find that most people I talk to have a purpose or a why or something that really drives them, that gets them up in the morning. What would you say your reason for doing what you do is?
I've thought about this a lot over the years because people ask this in interviews, ask it of you all the time. And honestly, I think at a very basic level, I am an extreme extrovert. I do not like to be alone. I do not like to be in the quiet. I am happier and have more energy when I am working with and communicating with others. It's just like a core part of who I am. And so sales tends to be a great type of role to get a lot of that. There's been a noticeable difference since working from home the last 5 years. I have more energy and feel great on days where I have a lot of meetings, even if they're on Zoom, but especially in person. And I feel much lower energy when I have days that I'm doing a lot of heads down work. But I think taking a step back as my life has changed over the last 5-6 years, I do it also for my family. I actually think I'm a better parent not being a full-time caretaker to my children. I am a better version of myself when I'm doing work like what I'm doing that makes me feel proud of myself, that makes me feel accomplished. And so when I am with my kids, I think I have a pretty good balance now since I work from home. Even though I don't love it, I love that I can optimize my time. So when I'm working, I am focused, I am working. And when the kids are home from school, I can just really enjoy them.
Yeah.
And I think it's good for them to see parents that are doing work that is challenging, that are doing things that they enjoy and are passionate about. And one thing I think about too is my kids seeing how you can create your own life. I grew up in a
Yeah.
very low income family. I thought my life would go a certain way. I've been pleasantly surprised to see how things have unfolded for me and have realized I have so much power to create the life that I want. If I want to travel a lot,
Right.
if I, whatever I want to do as an adult, I can do it, but I have to be intentional about how I build that life. And so I want our kids to see between our career and what that career enables us to do that we've been in control of building the life that we want.
That's awesome. That's exactly my feeling, and so many of the listeners' feeling that since we've started this podcast. So, I feel like in order to really do that, besides hard work, and I think that is a given for high performers, it doesn't just happen, but they also, do you have, routines, habits, and rituals that you go through? And I'm going to add one more thing: boundaries. So, you have littles, that you want to see work. And you just said, when I work, I'm working, and so how do you go about setting those boundaries and having that discipline for you in a way that works for you and your family?
This has been an area I really struggle with. I am someone who is highly motivated, but like rebels against structure. Anytime I have too much structure, I just like, oh, I can't handle it. I sabotage myself. And so for a long time, I would hear about other people's amazing morning routines. They get up at 5 and they do a workout and they write in their gratefulness journal and they cold plunge or whatever the heck people do. And it sounds super impressive, but I just could never consistently do all these things. And I would feel like a failure. Like, I just can't do this. And over time, I realized I had to figure out what rituals meant for me. And rituals and routines don't have to be like literally doing the exact same thing the exact same way. So I'm a little
Right.
looser in how I think about it, but I still have these things that keep me grounded. And I find that I change it. So especially based on phase of life. So my routines have changed quite a bit since having children than they did before.
Sure.
But even then, like right now we're on summer vacation. I still have childcare, but the situation's a little different. We don't have to get up as early. So my current routine for the next 2 months is a little different than what it's like normally. So for me, some of the things that work, I don't always start my day at exactly the same time. Sometimes I work out in the morning. Sometimes I have kid duty in the morning. Sometimes my husband does. But when I walk into my office, actually, let me take a step back. Before that, when I get up, some mornings since I work from home, I didn't have to be dressed and look great.
Right.
I would dive into the day, dive into the kids. And I would very quickly feel flustered or frustrated because things would be chaos. So getting up 30 minutes before the kids and having time to just like get in the right zone, have a cup of coffee, get prepared is one thing. Second is then I have to transition again. So great, I'm up super early. We've done the whole kid thing and now I gotta go to work and I've already been up for several hours and my brain is still sometimes in chaos land, especially when the morning is
Right.
Or I told you yesterday, my son was a brat all morning. He was demanding, he was crazy. He was fighting me on everything. So then I get to work and I feel like, shoot, I'm already behind. It's a little later than I wanted to get started. And now I'm all flustered and I'm frustrated. So then I have to kind of reset. So I have a mantra I say when I go into my office. And if I really have one of those days that I'm feeling a certain way, I've never been great at meditation, but I'll do this thing called 20 breaths where you literally just sit with your eyes closed and mindfully breathe in and out 20 times. And that can help me to like
Mm-hmm.
reset, reduce cortisol, and get started. And then the other thing I do is weekly and then daily calendar blocking. So again, if I overstructure my calendar after so many weeks, I'll just start to ignore the blocks. So that doesn't work.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
So I will each week think about what I need to accomplish and make a few blocks, especially for like my morning routines, my personal stuff. And then each day I'll look at my calendar and make sure I'm kind of preparing and thinking through, okay, this block I'll do this and blocking things off. So that's some of what has.
That makes sense. You mentioned mantra. Do you mind sharing your mantra, or is it personal?
It's a little personal, but
Okay.
designed to get me in a state where I am, it's very cheesy, but my BetterUp coaches talk to me about being kinder to myself and getting myself in a state where I can be focused.
I've learned that I have this weird need for safety. Like not physical safety. Nobody's coming in my office, but like, whether it's financial safety or my kids are taken care of or whatever. And part of one of the mantras that I use is just like, I'm safe. We're safe. It's all good, and it's just those little reminders that like, hey, this thing that's stressing you out is not so huge, right?
Yes.
So I'm curious, have you always been the way that you kind of hold your blocks and your time loosely, but you still have your own way of structure, or is that developed over time? Was there a moment where you kind of hit a breaking point and you were like, oh my gosh?
Yeah, well, kids will break you real fast. So before I had children, I worked like a crazy person. I worked like 70 hours a week. I worked all the time. Truth be told, I wasn't working efficiently. I hadn't learned about myself or taken the time to learn what sort of things that I need to stay on track, and that super structure doesn't work. So how can I work around that? Because I also, by the way, at the end of the day, I didn't mention when I am stopping work and going to kid time, I also want to be present with them. So I sort of do the same thing at the end of my day. I try to like do a quick check of everything and kind of, sometimes I have to do the breaths again if it was a stressful day to reset. So I kind of have a beginning and end, two different beginnings.
Right.
But no, I definitely was not self-aware enough earlier, but I just counteracted it by working all the time. So then when I had children, it was like, okay, I have to work more efficiently. I only have so much time I can work if I actually want to be present at home. And I would say now, for the most part, I can still get about as much done in far less hours by being more efficient with my time. And I don't do things like I used to, like, I'm going to sit in front of the TV and work for 2 more hours tonight. Then I'm barely working, but I still feel like I've been working. So then you're like stressing, you're getting yourself burnt out, and you haven't actually done anything of value. So no, I changed that a lot. But the other thing for me, some people know this about my story, I was laid off 2 months into my maternity leave with my first child. And that, after I had dedicated so much of my life, my time, to some degree, like my heart into this business, this family, it was a good wake-up call that people can be loyal to other people, but ultimately a business is only looking out for its own interest. And why am I killing myself? Why am I putting so much of myself into something that doesn't love me back? So I still care about and invest in people and put a lot into what I do, but I have better boundaries now to say, this is my job. This is a what brings me fulfillment, but it is not my family. And so that also was a good wake-up call for me to start looking better at balance and what's reasonable for me to give to my career.
Right. And what are the things that are going to last? We named off, I think, 3 careers that you've had, or 3 job stops that you've had along your career path. But they're gone now. They were wonderful at the time for you, but like your family is permanent, right? Your own health and well-being is permanent. And so I think, I've certainly been guilty of being in a startup where it's all consuming and you think that whatever is right in front of you is the only thing that matters. And I've learned as I've grown that that's just not the case. And you can still be an incredibly good and successful part of that team, oftentimes better because you're more well balanced and you have that mental clarity and you're able to give all of you when you're there. So I'm curious, you clearly have a lot of things and people around you, your husband and everything. How do you recognize when things are a little too crazy or you're getting off balance, right? And do you have people or structure in your life to kind of throw that caution flag before you totally bottom out and just go crazy?
Often it's my husband, who's also my best friend, Landon, who's a business owner. We're in a similar line of work. He was in sales at one point too. Usually he is the one saying, something's off about you, or you're on edge, or you're being really short with the family. What's going on? And so usually he's the one to alert me, but I also have really great friends, especially my girlfriends who I meet with not as often as I would like to anymore, but at least texting and meeting occasionally. And they can kind of tell when something's off. And so sometimes I don't notice it, others in my life that keep me grounded will. And I think the concept of balance is really interesting because I used to think, and I think a lot of people think of balance as like, okay, work-life balance means everything is totally in balance.
Right.
There really is no, like if you have an actual scale with weights and you're looking at balance, you can almost never have things perfectly in balance, at least for very long.
Nope.
There's always some level of variation. So I think of it more as a balancing act. And as long as the balancing act is going between whatever degrees are normal, maybe 15% up and down either way, some weeks, some days, you're just going to be a better parent or friend or spouse. Some days, weeks better at work, whatever's going on in life. So as long as it's staying within the normal range most of the time, and there's only occasional extremes, then like, let's be happy with our life. We're not going to be perfect all the time. But noticing when things are too far off balance. I've been working a lot of late nights for a lot of weeks in a row now. Something's off, or I just can't stop feeling anxious when I'm not working. Those are the kind of triggers that tell me if I'm off balance too long.
Right. We talk about, the definition of balance is something along the lines of the equilibrium of equal and opposing forces, and so if you think about it as like literally standing in the middle of like a seesaw when you're a kid, right? You got to keep moving your legs like this to stay in quote balance. And so I think there's such a misnomer that balance is stillness, and it's not, right? It's actually constant motion, maybe micro motions, but to keep yourself in balance, it's really moving. It's an act, and something you said that just now that I just love is you're like, let's be okay with that, and that is a conscious choice. And I think a lot of people, I've certainly struggled with having a conscious choice sometimes to just be okay with the chaos, right? And literally this morning I had a plumber come in to look at some house maintenance stuff, and I had somebody else that was coming to look at something else, and I had my kids, and I had this big call at 9:30, and my wife is teaching summer school, and the kids are home and needed breakfast, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, what is this? But guess what? It's 1:30, and we made it through all of that, and everything's fine. Right. And in the moment, I was not totally fine, but everything's fine 2 hours later, and so I love that choice. Have you always been able to just stop and choose, okay, let's just be okay with this?
No, that's another thing I think you hopefully learn by having toddlers because of the unreasonableness of them that keeps you. So I told you the story yesterday. My husband was out of town in Vegas for way too long. And I prepared myself. All right, I'm going to have extra kid duty and I've got this. I'm not going to complain. I'm going to have the right mindset. So I purposely kind of tried to prepare myself. Each morning I got up extra early so I could just get in the zone, get some caffeine. So we were doing pretty good. And the fourth night he was gone, the food that I had bought for dinner, the vegetables had already gone bad. So I was like, dang it, now I got to give them some processed thing from the freezers. I was feeling kind of crummy about that. Then right after we ate, my son was potty training, peed all over the floor, was walking in it and spreading it everywhere. So I clean him up. I run upstairs to get new pants for him. And then When I come down, the dog has thrown up twice on the floor. And I just had one of those like really moments. And so I just took a breath. I realized like, this is not the end of the world. Tomorrow will come. This will be over. So I, clean up the mess. I put the kids in front of the TV. I open a bottle of wine and I allow myself for like 10 minutes to be pissed off. So I'm just napping 10 minutes and then I'm like, all right, we're done with this. So I like cuddled on the couch with the kids and I planned to do something more active. Instead, we had a more chill night. But yeah, I think that happens enough. And you realize like the alternative is I could be really crabby and really frustrated, which is partially justified, but that's not helping anyone. It gets the kids anxious. It ruins their night. It ruins mine. So I think back to the topic of balance, when I'm in that, 15% swing of balance, I can handle that situation with maturity.
Right.
When I'm not, that's when I fly off the handle, right? Whether it's been too much stress at work, whatever else is going on. And those are sometimes the triggers that show me like, oh, I normally wouldn't have reacted that way.
Right.
Something's going on.
So if something is bigger than the 20-second or the 20 breath, technique, do you have a go-to? You just talked about, hey, give myself 10 minutes to be pissed off and have a glass of wine. Is that your go-to? Or are there other things where when you really need to pump the brakes and recenter that you kind of go to?
It depends on what it is. Like if the curveball is something as simple as like a small moment in time frustration, or if it's something bigger, but generally I try to remind myself, we praise the best athletes, the best musicians, the best whoever. Anyone successful has gone through tons and tons and tons of failures and has gotten really good at pushing them aside and continuing on. So I always kind of try to remind myself that my mindset, my ability to like persist and move on is what will make me more successful, happier. But especially with like a deep, not getting a promotion, some sort of work disappointment.
Yeah.
I found that for me, if I just try to move forward too quickly, I hold resentment. So I do have to give myself time, and depending on the level of disappointment, it may be a few minutes, it may be a few days or weeks, but give myself time to be angry, to be emotional, to complain about it. But there has to be some trigger when I say, all right, that's done. And I have to kind of sit with myself and remind myself of things that I'm grateful for, take the emotion out. A big thing I try to do is kind of what you said earlier, put things into perspective. I didn't get the promotion that I want. There are people who don't have food in other places. There are people in a bad situation. Like, this is not the biggest deal. I can handle this. And so I try to like shift the focus into, okay, what am I grateful for? What's going well? And how talked before about how to create the life you want. You don't just create it and then you live it for the rest of your life. It's like a continual thing. So I didn't get this. What do I want to do now? Do I need to go look at another company to get that role? Do I need to keep fighting here? And if so, what does that path look like? Do I need to, whatever? And so start to turn into problem solving mode. That's how I think about it. But then like tactical things I do, very nerdy, but I'm into puzzling. So sometimes if it's been a really stressful week, I'll start a puzzle and I'll spend the rest of the week doing that. Workouts, long walks are big for me. And reading.
Yeah. Are you a fiction reader, or do you read more business books, or, biographies, nonfiction?
Usually
what's your go-to?
Business type of books, but if I'm really holding on to something, I try to do fiction. I don't do fiction often enough, but sometimes it's a good way to just take you out of your own head.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to do fiction more as well. There's always a million business books on the side of my desk that I want to read, and I do enjoy those, but that's kind of work-ish, And so when we were out of town with my mother-in-law this past weekend, and it rained on us, and there was really not much to do. And so I grabbed a book, and next thing I know, I've been reading for hours. Like, I covered 200 pages of this fiction book, And it was awesome. It was not time wasted. And it was something that I've not given myself permission to do in a very, very long time. And I felt really refreshed. And I was like, I need to do that more, because usually my go-to is something very physical, exertion wise, which clears my brain and gets my endorphins going, but it doesn't help with like exhaustion necessarily,
Yeah. And sometimes when you are a little burnt out, your brain needs to be free to think about other things, and then you start to get more clarity on the situation. Puzzles are like that for me too.
Yeah.
When struggles to sit still and meditate, it becomes meditative. My brain is sort of thinking about it, but it can really wander in a way that I think you're supposed to achieve with meditation. And so, yeah, finding things that you don't have to be productive all the time. Find ways to free.
That's right.
That aren't tedious.
And for me, I have to give myself and remind myself that I can give myself permission to do those things. I don't have to be cranking at every single stage of every day. It's not sustainable, at least for me. And so, I have to remind myself, you've given amazing thoughts and experiences, and one thing, if there's one piece of advice to someone who's looking up to you or struggling or trying to find that balance between working really hard and killing it and wanting to kill it, and wanting to be an extrovert and wanting to be a mom or a dad or whatever's important to them, what would you say?
Well, on this topic of balance and both achieving what you want professionally and personally, I think my advice is lower your expectations. Not lower your expectations, not lower your goals, not lower your efforts, but your expectations. Yeah. So prepare for what you can, and then be prepared to be unprepared. So the example I gave before about like preparing for my day. Some mornings, despite how much I prepare, so I can set out things, prepare their lunch ahead of time, whatever things I need to do for the morning routine. So I can prepare, and I need to do that as much as possible. No matter what, sometimes crazy stuff is going to happen in the morning. Ridiculous things happen sometimes. And so then part of that preparation is being prepared to say, this morning may be chaotic, so I need to take whatever I need to take to get myself in the mindset and to not be too disappointed. And so I think part of thinking about balance is also knowing yourself and what you can handle. What you can handle at certain stages. So whether you're a new parent, maybe it's you're taking care of a parent, or there's all sorts of things aside from parenthood that could take up a lot of your personal time. When you've got something big going on, maybe you briefly aren't leaning in quite as hard to your career. It doesn't mean you're not still career focused, but there may be a phase of life where you just can't handle more of X or more of Y. So being really thoughtful about what do I need? And I would start with the personal, like what's going on personally, and then what do I need in the other areas of my life to fill that in? Because if we're going too extreme on what we're doing work-wise, we've got a lot of other responsibility. Maybe we're doing a project on the side, whatever things, that's when we're more likely to fly off the handle every time something goes wrong.
That's right.
So I think it's like lowering the expectation of what's going to happen around you so you're not overly upset all the time, and then optimizing your life. So an example, there was a time where my husband and I were getting frustrated. We both felt like we were with the kids all the time. We weren't getting our workout time in. We weren't getting away enough. And we just kind of sat in this. And then we realized if I was hearing this from my friend, she was saying, this is happening in my family, I would ask her questions like, well, have you taken a step back to think about how you could better structure your schedule? Would it make sense to have a babysitter or a nanny come 2 or 3 nights a week to help? Or would it make sense for you guys to trade off? One morning you have the kids and he does a workout and vice versa. What things could you do in your life? Should you hire a maid to come do more of the cleaning? Like what things could be taken off your plate to reduce that pressure and improve the balance? And so that's how I try to think about it. And that's what I would recommend to people. We all have different situations. You just gotta stop worrying about what anybody else is doing and figure out how do you optimize so you can keep things in balance. What resources?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. I need to listen to that, because it's crazy. Lower your expectations. I'm going to hang on to that one. I could have done that this morning. To finish up, is there anything that you're excited about or looking forward to personally or professionally, as you're, going into this season of your life?
The theme for me this season of life really goes along all that we just talked about. It's I'm in a phase of trying to do less, but being more intentional and having more enjoyment.
Yes.
I think you get to a place in your career where you say, I make enough money, I have enough success. Do I want more? Yes, but I'm at a place where I have the luxury of being able to slow down a little bit and make sure I'm really enjoying life. I don't want to be the person who works like crazy until I'm 60, 70, 80, and then I wait to enjoy my life then. So
Right.
I've really been thinking about, like career-wise, how are my strengths best used and how do I optimize for that? How do I not take on as much, but do things exceptionally well and really deliver? At home with my family, I actually recently been reading this parenting book that says so many of us try to make every day spectacular for our kids. And sometimes the best thing you can do for them is just for it to be mundane, for them just home and play with
Yes.
their toys. Like, why are we trying to make every day the best day ever? Sometimes normal days are just what everybody needs and you can just enjoy them. So I think it's like scaling back and just trying to enjoy the mundane things about career, about personal life, and so that I'm doing them well and feel proud of what I'm doing versus trying to achieve things.
Yeah, it's living instead of being on a treadmill or a hamster wheel, but it's really experiencing life. And I appreciate you sharing that with us today. Everyone, you can connect with Tonni in the show notes. I'll put her LinkedIn there. And thank you so much. Thank you to Market Scale for making this happen. Check out growthwell.tv for more information, and we'll see you next time.